Hello, friends, it's Kat from Meow Meow Kapow. In the video where I talked about whether or not art school was worth it, which I've helpfully linked up in the iCards if you're curious, I mentioned that the only job I was able to get out of college was as an overnight baker. I love doing kitchen-y stuff, and I even like doing it for other people, but the company that I was working for was run by some pretty evil people who went out of their way to make us feel oppressed and miserable. So for a few years, my soul withered and died at that baking job while I continued to do as I had done. Applied desperately to any and every job I could get and go to every single interview given to me. When you're desperate like that, you can get kind of stupid, and I wanted out so badly I was willing to sell what was left of my tattered soul to the first devil willing to make a deal with me. Which is how I found myself working for a modeling agency. Side note, I love the story of how I quit my baking job, so I'm telling y'all it now. One of my best friends and I both worked for the same company and both absolutely hated it and still completely panic when we see a specific kind of car due to truly how dread-filled seeing those headlights made us. Anyway, you may have noticed, given my channel name, cover image, and the fact that Bubba is at the end of all of my videos, but I like cats. You know, just a smidge. And I'd found an abandoned kitten that was injured and in need of help, which, due to the fact that my sister and I have both volunteered with animals, meant we had a hookup for getting the poor baby treated and fostered, but it had to be done right then and there. My friend was off for the night because she'd swapped her shift with someone else, but the night in question was my secret last shift. They didn't know I was quitting, and I had decided I wanted to make sure that this was a bridge I'd fully burned so I wouldn't be tempted to try and work there again. So I said, F it, we're doing this. My friend said, wait, are you quitting tonight? And I was like, yup. And she said, hold up, let me turn my phone off, which she did while I calmly called our traumatizing horse bag of a boss and told them I was done. Bye forever. Her turning off her phone was the right move because said boss attempted to pull anyone at all in on their day off to cover me while we went off and saved a kitten. He trash-talked me to her the next day, but we both totally agree that it was the right thing to do, even though things ended up turning out a bit of a clusterfuffle afterwards, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, I was ready to quit my baking job because of the modeling agency job I'd managed to snag and figured I was moving on up in the world. Spoilers, I was not, in fact, moving on up. I'm pretty sure I was temporarily a scammer, if I'm completely honest. It just took me a long while to figure that out is all. If I had been of sound enough mind, my first warning sign should have been during the interview, in which they mentioned that the first few days of work would be unpaid training days in New York, even though the office I'd been working in was Philly adjacent. Raise your hand if you're smart enough to hear those warning bells I just completely and totally ignored. Again, I was desperate, and it didn't occur to me that a place that had a building and offices and employees and such could be nefarious. I'd only worked really in the food industry and as a secretary at my college at that point, so wasn't really experienced in... No wait, I guess I was experienced in shady dealings. Huh. Never really thought about it until now, but perspective is everything. Anyway, the job was 100% commission, which is why the training days were unpaid, and the office in Philly wasn't finished being built yet, which was why we had to go to New York to learn the ropes. Thankfully, I had a car, a full tank of gas, and some family I could stay with in North Jersey to severely cut down on the overall travel. Totally fine! I needed this job, after all, and what's the big deal over a couple of hoops if all I've got to do is jump through them, you know? So I get to the place and it's all glitz and glam and there's a projector over a runway and club music and pow, 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 fashion, or whatever. Little loud for my tastes, but makes sense for the market, right? And we're each taken under the wing of someone who already works there and allowed to shadow them and learn their scripts. There's a couple of different departments, and like most places of employment, you work for one specific department and what the rest of the team does is vaguely mystery of some sort. You know, they do something, but if anyone asks you for specific details beyond broad strokes, you basically just say, "Nah, my department." I was in the first stage, which I don't remember the actual name of, but it was where people would come with themselves or their kids or whoever with hopes and dreams of becoming a model or an actor or singer or whatever. We'd show them headshots and testimonials of people who had come through before and gotten success, talk to them about how great the company was, say that we offered promotional services, and tell them it would be however much money to book a session with a photographer, but they could secure their spot with a $100 down payment if they couldn't do the full amount right now. If anyone asked what to expect with a photo shoot, we'd say things like, the team will make sure you look your best and the photographer will let it shine through the pictures, or whatever, because none of the people in my section knew the specifics of how Section 2 worked. Section 2 was where the photography shoot would happen. They'd come in, get fancied up by the makeup team, have their photos done, and then go home for a bit before coming back in a week or so to review their shots and talk with someone in the third section of the scheme. It took me a while to learn this, but that's also where they would offer more services. I believe it's where they'd specifically say that if they wanted copies of the photos, they had to pay X amount because what they'd pay for with Section 1 was just to actually book the photo session, not to have the actual photos or for the marketing services. And they'd blame us and say we should have explained it better, made it clear that the marketing stuff was separate and that they'd need to pay extra to have copies of their headshots and all. But this information was deliberately kept mysterious to us, so it's not like we knew it was a money trap all the way down. We were all just encouraged to do our part, and our part only, then shuffle them on down to the next person in line. Which sounds a heck of a lot like those Indian Microsoft phone scammer things, if you ask me, just in a different way. Because this was a fully commissioned job, and I had gone from being desperate to still being desperate, I was a pretty terrible salesperson. The lower my piddly paychecks became, the more people I tried to sell to kept walking away, just making it worse. I was a wreck, and I needed every single cent and couldn't for the life of me figure out why I was doing so poorly. But I think, deep down, a part of me knew I was doing something wrong, and that's why I couldn't bring myself to be cutthroat and do whatever it took to get that fiddle-faddle. I never lied to people, and was always upfront about whatever I knew to make sure their expectations were set, rather than keeping them blinded with razzle-dazzle and hypnosis. So let's talk about the day I quit this job, too, because it was also another morality moment. I didn't really have outright suspicions at that point, I mostly just had personal financial trouble and a heap load of stress, but my gut knew something was wrong before my head did. A friend from that soul-sucking baking job walked in with his girlfriend, and I saw them after they'd already met with a consultant and put in a down payment for a package. And my heart sank. I took him aside and told him to get out right then and there. They couldn't get a refund from the development agency, but maybe they could stop the payment and run while they still could. When I went home that night, I had maybe $10 in my bank account, almost no gas in my car, and no real prospect of an upcoming paycheck. I called them up and said that unless they were planning on putting a full tank of gas in my car, I literally couldn't make the hour-long drive up the next day, and they could consider that my resignation. They accepted it. I felt at peace with the decision. They called the next morning and begged me to be one of their secretaries, since I'd had experience as one at my university and had been helping the girls at the reception desk before one of them also quit the same night I had. The secretaries were the only people who weren't on commission and had a guaranteed paycheck. I told them no thanks and hung up. Things didn't work out for the best immediately afterwards, and I ended up working for another shady company afterwards, but at least my experience at the modeling agency helped me avoid some other scams. My experience does make me wonder, though, how many of the people who work in those Indian Microsoft call center scam places actually know what they're doing? How many suspect what they're doing? And how many are just so blind with desperation that they don't even question what the work is as long as it gets them through another day? It makes me wonder about what other shady business practices are out there, and I've also thought about some of the shady business practices I've been involved with that didn't feel great at the time, but hindsight proved to me they were truly not okay. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've got any to share. As always, if you're curious about the supplies used in this piece, they're linked down in the doobly-doo. If you want to keep me from having to go through another hand-fasting ceremony with evil, consider throwing out a like and subscribe lifeboat, or even clicking on some of those aforementioned links down below. Until I see you next time, I wish you peace, love, and prosperity.